Courtney Victoria. Trying out a new lens and breakfast in the woods, apparently.
I've pretty much just spent a week in office, and so I am in need of some outdoor time, and I thought that I would bring you with me. Some absolutely gorgeous trees in this area. Now, as you may have noticed, this is not my usual camera kit that I take out into the woods with me. This is not mine. However, I have ordered my own OM1 Mark II. It's currently in transit and on the way. I've finally invested in my own camera body so I can stop borrowing other people's. And this is a new lens by OM System. And do you know what? We will talk about this later, but for now I have this wonderful woodland scene here. So I'm going for a pano scene here, and we've got this pathway with these two huge ancient trees either side, sort of like two guards, guarding the gateway to this woodland. And then just beyond the gate, you can just see this absolute jumbled mess of woodland. So here I have the new 50 to 200mm f2.8 telephoto lens by OM System. In full frame terms, that is essentially a 100 to 400 telephoto lens, a focal length that I've grown to really love over the past year or so because it's so versatile. I actually think what excites me most about this setup is the image stabilization. Now, mind you, this is coming from a photographer who is generally using a tripod most of the time because I have shaky hands and not enough confidence when it comes to being handheld. I drink too much caffeine. So this lens has 7 stops of image stabilization, and therefore this setup is quite exciting to me because it just gives me that little boost of confidence to go handheld a bit more. But also that telephoto rule of matching your shutter speed to your focal length so that your images come out sharp. So for example, if you're shooting at 400mm, then you should at least have a 400th of a second shutter speed. That kind of goes out the window with this. Now, I appreciate that image stabilization is not a new thing. For me, it's still quite a novelty. And for moving subjects, you're still going to need fast shutter speeds. However, for stationary subjects like trees, you can get away with slower shutter speeds. So let's see how slow I can go.
I used a leaning tree draped in ferns as my test subject, working through a range of shutter speeds from 200th of a second, which was my natural setting at ISO 200 and f2.8, down to 1/3 of a second. And I would say 1/8 of a second was my limit, which was still better than I had expected. But it made for a fun little experiment.
So I've noticed that there are a lot of deer here, and they're slowly making their way in towards the woods. And they're not that skittish. I mean, they're skittish because they're deer, but in comparison to the Forest of Dean deer, they're really not that skittish. So what I'm going to do is leave all my stuff in the car so I'm not carrying loads of stuff, and just go back in with the OM1 50 to 200mm lens and a 2x converter and see if I can get anything.
The deer weren't hard to spot and seemed fairly accustomed to people, but I kept my distance knowing that a single wrong move could send them running. I love watching deer, but photographing them through the craziness of the woodland was challenging. They were slowly moving deeper into the woods, likely to avoid the dog walkers and probably me as well, but I gave it my best shot.
Ooh, lovely. One of my favourite forest macro exercises, seeing exercises, is to just stay within a small boundary of forest and see how many different subjects I can notice. And I think that's what I'm going to do here with this 50 to 200mm lens. And you're probably thinking, Courtney, you're going to do that with a telephoto lens? What on earth? And actually, I'm going to do it with the help of this. So this is a 2x teleconverter that I'm going to pop in between the camera body and the lens. And I'm just going to explain quickly how this is going to work. So for macro photography, you need 1:1 or 1x magnification. So the average telephoto lens will give you around 0.3 to 0.4x magnification, which is not enough. This lens here gives me 0.5, and then with the converter on the 2x converter, that bumps that up to 1x magnification. So ideally, I should be able to take some macro images with this setup. Now, a question that some of you may now have is, okay, why choose a dedicated macro lens when you can just bump up the magnification on an existing lens by using things like this, extension tubes, converters? And that is a good question. So macro lenses are optimized for flat field reproduction, so edge-to-edge sharpness and minimal distortion at close focus. Now, telephoto lenses, on the other hand, are designed for distance, and although they may be able to get close up, quality generally isn't as refined. But this is where intention matters. If something like versatile shooting is something that you are looking for, then a telephoto lens with close focus capability may be extremely helpful. You could go from wildlife photography, photographing subjects from afar, to close-up macro photography without having to change any of your setup, without having to swap out lenses, which is incredibly useful. And if you're photographing subjects that may move, then a little bit of extra reach, sort of standing further back from your subject, may be helpful. Now, when I'm going out with a dedicated macro lens, the intent really is for sharpness, as much detail and texture as possible, for a controlled working distance, and for ultimate precision. Anyway, that is enough gear talk. Essentially, I'm just really curious to see how macro images would turn out with this setup in comparison to sort of my macro kit. But for now, I've framed up the remnants of what I believe were once foxglove flowers. And at the moment, I'm really drawn to these sort of withering aspects of the forest as everything starts to break down, as summer comes to an end. And I find the tones and the textures very, very fascinating.
I was pleased with how the image turned out. It was sharp, full of detail, but in truth, I don't think anything can rival a dedicated macro lens. I tried using it exactly as I would normally for my macro work, but I personally find telephoto lenses are a bit more clumsy to use at low angles and prefer to work handheld with it most of the time. The versatility was welcome though. Not long after, I glimpsed a few deer slipping through the trees and managed to catch a few fleeting seconds before they vanished. Usually carrying a telephoto sort of wears me down a bit and I lose the will to keep going, but this setup was very comfortable, and I found myself walking further than expected. In fact, I took this setup on a hike in Wales, the weather unfortunately being a complete washout.
Oh yeah, that's rain, and that's coming this way. When I first heard about this lens, I was quite excited by it because I thought, wow, a lightweight, small telephoto lens, that's pretty cool. And when I received it, I was taken aback because it's pretty much the same size as my own telephoto lens for my Nikon. It's just lighter. But then I thought about it a bit more. Now, my telephoto lens is technically classed as a budget lens, so it's not f2.8, and it's quite compact in comparison to how big telephoto lenses can get. Now, this is a pro lens, and when I think about this lens in terms of versatility, although it would be adding something to this setup, if you pop a 2x converter on here, which is a tiny dinky little thing, this gives you up to 800mm of full frame equivalent focal length. And when you think of how big an 800mm lens is, this, in comparison, is small and lightweight. There is a mushroom down by my foot. I'm just going to grab it. Look at that. Lovely. Haven't found a mushroom in a while. It's all slimy.
And that was me completely distracted. And you'll be happy to hear that that was the only fungus that I found. Now, I don't really have anything to compare this lens to as a fairly newish OM user. However, I can say with confidence that those of you who have been looking forward to this lens will not be disappointed. Anyway, I think that is enough of me today. So thank you so much for watching today's video, and thank you OM System for allowing me to try this lens out, and I'll see you next time.